Have you ever thought about how bad matchmaking is in Clash Royale? I know I have. Over my 8 years playing this game, across 4 accounts in virtually all stages of the game, I have had my fair share of questionable matches. This, though, has led me to develop quite an interest in how this all works, and more importantly, how it could be modelled and improved. As such, in this video, I shall try to explore how we can optimize matchmaking in this game. Let's begin. First of all, we need to consider how the system works currently. Let's start off by imagining this is you, a level 11 player. The moment you click the battle button, what happens? Well, the game will immediately place you into a pool of players who also happen to be searching for a match at either your level or one level above or below yours. So in this case, you could face a level 10 or 12 player, which seems reasonable enough. Now, fast forward 5 seconds, and because of all of our modern day short attention spans, we begin to grow irritated with the wait. For this reason, the matchmaking pool expands its level parameters to encompass players that are now 2 levels above or below you. So now you could face a level 9 or 13 player, and if that somehow hasn't even worked, after 5 more seconds for a total of 10 seconds in the queue, these parameters will now extend to 3 entire levels above or below. This looks improbable, but I can confirm with 2 accounts at level 11 at 7,500 trophies, I have faced many level 14 players before. It is not impossible, but they don't end very well, of course. Now, on this note, it is worth mentioning that war matchmaking follows a similar principle, but with a slight change. Instead of the level parameters increasing by 1 every 5 seconds for war matchmaking, this happens every 20 seconds. The big question with this is whether this approach is fair or not. Now, I think it is, since Supercell is, after all, a company attempting to keep the player engaged, and giving players a match to compete in is arguably better than making them wait, or even worse, giving them no match at all in the extreme cases. And the system was indeed confirmed by Supercell themselves, by the way, so it's not something I'm making up. Now, before going much further, it would be beneficial to consider Clash Royale's trophy dynamics and delve further into how that works. On your screen, you will see 2 formulae that look pretty much identical. The first denotes the calculation for how many trophies you would gain after a win, and the second shows how many trophies you would lose after a loss. Self-explanatory. But just a quick note, this also applies to Ultimate Champion medal dynamics in exactly the same way as trophies. So these formulae apply to them as well. Now, you may have wondered what K and D are here. K in this case is a variable that represents the maximum number of trophies that you can gain or lose in Clash Royale. If you want to guess, you can pause and think about what that could be. But well, if you didn't bother to, I don't blame you. The answer is actually 59. K is 59. Now, D here is the difference in trophies between you and your opponent. Just make sure in the formula that your difference is positive. So just subtract the greater value from the smaller one. Anyways, let's try to plug some values in here and see what we get. I've chosen 2 scenarios here, and they are actually real, which I'll get onto in a bit. Now, say I have 2,087 Ultimate Champion medals, and my opponent has 2,105. How many would I gain if I won? Well, entering K equals 59 into the formula, and D as the difference between 2015 and 2087 medals, I end up with a net gain of 31 medals, rounded to the nearest medal, of course. Same with this loss example. I have 2,056, and the opponent has 2,078. K is still 59, and we end up with 28 trophies lost. Sad times. Just to prove this works here is the real battle log information from Royale API. Well, you can indeed see that I did gain 31 in the match against the Royal Giant, and I did unfortunately lose 28 in the match against whatever that deck is. But honestly, that player was insane. There's definitely a large skill gap between me and him. Anyways, the next concept to consider is the winners pool, which is the system whereby Supercell takes players in the player pool who have won 3 or more matches in a row and tries to matchmake you against other winners. This is also true in the converse. For those who have lost 3 times in a row, well, tough luck, because you'll be facing other opponents in the same position. Sounds simple enough, I hope. Now, with all that out of the way, in this portion of the video, I'll be exploring different matchmaking frameworks, since the aim of this video is, of course, to try and model some form of optimization for matchmaking. I've chosen to consider the Elo Rating System and the TrueSkill System. Now, of course, many others exist, but these are my personal favorites, and they weren't as boring to research, so that's a plus. The Elo rating system is actually used famously in chess. In essence, it works by updating the ratings of each player based on the outcome of a match, comparing the actual result with the expected result. Each player has an initial rating value, from which obviously you can climb points from or indeed lose points from, and most of the time this starts at 1200. Before a match between two players, player A and player B, the expected probability of A winning is calculated using the first two formulae on the screen. Note, they do look the same, but the difference is that the ratings difference is flipped for each to take into account the rating differences as two different values, one positive and one negative. After the match is played between player A and B, the actual scores are found. So if player A wins, their score variable would be 1, and if they draw, 0.5, and if they lose, 0. The score for player B will just always be the opposite of player A's score. So if player A wins, they got 1, therefore player A gets 0, i.e. they lose. Then with this information, the ratings of each player are updated. The new rating of each player is adjusted based on the differences between the actual results and the expected result, with K controlling the magnitude of this adjustment. So developers could just adjust K to best fit the scale of their scoring system, which in Clash Royale's case are the trophies or Ultimate Champion medals. Now, the Elo system definitely is an effective system for matchmaking. It is well known, so there is a lot of reference material out there, and the adjustment of player scores based on match outcome favors stable player bases who will play the game consistently. However, of course, this comes at a cost, that being far more emphasis on how you perform in previous matches, and you'll end up waiting quite a while for a match towards the extremes of the player Elo distribution. The next matchmaking system is TrueSkill, which was created by Microsoft for Xbox, and it works by considering both the skill level of players and the uncertainty in their skill estimates. This is arguably a large step up from the Elo system, and the main difference is that TrueSkill models each player's skill as a distribution rather than a single point estimate. In TrueSkill, each player's skill, mu, is represented by a Gaussian distribution as shown on the screen. Mu is the mean skill level, or sometimes called the perceived skill level of a player, and sigma is the standard deviation of that player's skill estimate, or in better terms, the uncertainty of that estimate. Before a match, the matchmaking system tries to predict the outcome by calculating the difference in skill distributions between two players, which is shown in the second formula, where delta is the difference. It takes both players' perceived skill level and their uncertainties as shown. To find the probability that player A would win, the system standardizes the prediction difference by subtracting its mean and dividing by its standard deviation. This turns delta into a standard normal variable z, which has a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. Then the cumulative distribution function is used, to account for the probabilistic nature of the skill distributions, and that also makes them easier to compare. After the match, TrueSkill updates each player's skill distribution as shown on the screen. The SI is the actual match outcome, win being 1, draw being 0.5, and loss being 0. E is the expected outcome. C is a scaling factor that functions similarly to others like it. As such, the value of C would be determined based on the context of where that system would be used in. TrueSkill, honestly, is a great system, and it is a lot more accurate than the Elo system for less games played. It also takes into account varying skill levels, which is a more realistic representation of how players perform. After all, we all have our losing streaks. With more complexity, however, comes the requirement to update player ratings far more often, and overall, the system uses a lot of data, which takes a while to process. So now, with all this in mind, the real question is, how can we optimize matchmaking? Definitely a big question. But before I begin, remember this is not officially endorsed by Supercell. This is just the product of some of my own research and some of my own thinking. So just keep that in mind. Anyways, here is what I suggest. Video game companies these days have one main objective, and that is to keep players playing their games. Who wouldn't want that after all? Usually, more playtime is directly proportional to more revenue, and we all know how much Supercell likes their revenue, of course. But how do we improve player engagement? The main answer, or the basic answer, is to minimize churn, which is the chance that a player will stop playing the game after a match. Now, please keep in mind this can go both ways. It doesn't just encompass rage quitting, it also accounts for players leaving the game due to it being too easy, since, after all, if you win all of the time, then you will inevitably get bored because you're not being challenged. So, how do we minimize the players leaving? How do we minimize churn? Well, there are many answers regarding the quality of a game, but here we are trying to answer merely through terms of matchmaking systems. So in order to do that, first, let's think about the player matchmaking pool. Let's say all of the Clash Royale's players are in this box, all 12 of them. Well, it would be a boring game with 12 players. But anyway, let's model all 12 of these players on a connected graph, whereby each link between every player is drawn. Bonus points since the shape looks nice. We want to find the combination of player matchups that reduces the churn risk, i.e. the risk of the player leaving after the match. So if we say that any path between any two players is a matchup, we want to find the combination of paths that has the lowest total edge weight. Just to put into perspective how tough this gets, the number of total edges in a connected graph for n number of players is denoted by the formula on your screen. So for this graph, there are 12 times 11 all over 2 edges, which is 66 edges. You may be thinking that's nothing, but if there were just 1,000 players, the edge number becomes 499,500. And if there are 1 million, well, I can't even be bothered to read that number. Hopefully you get what I mean. So our matchmaking model here is overall engagement focused. That's the aim here. The weight of each edge, which is shown here as W, is the sum of the churn risks of when one player faces another and vice versa. You could call them players A and B, but here they are player I and player J. Mathematically, the model that would optimize matchmaking, written as M star here, actually just becomes a task of solving the minimum weight perfect matchmaking problem, which honestly could have its own separate video explaining in far more depth. But we are limited in time here, so I highly encourage you to research it online since it is very, very interesting. Anyway, the model is finding the pairing that minimizes the sum of the churn risks for all of the players in the matchmaking graph. Now, this looks great, and you may be wondering, why are there still a couple of minutes remaining in this video? Well, that's simply because this engagement optimized matchmaking model that I've shown you, respectfully, is quite bad. It is short-term focused, and over time and scale, it struggles a lot. It can also bore skilled players, and feel rigged. I've also written here that it could be manipulated. And once again, I can make a whole other video about how, but in summary, this matchmaking is actually used in a lot of other popular games, some of which you'll know, like FIFA, Apex Legends, Overwatch, Call of Duty, a ton pretty much, and even Clash Royale does to an extent through their win-loss pools. People who play these games can often play in a manner that eventually manipulates matchmaking to placing them in easier lobbies, since many of these games use AI to manage these processes. For example, players often take small breaks so that the system knows that you play only after losses. And also, players can choose to play for a long time, for example 2 hours, after a win, to try and make the system know that winning is actually very important to retain this type of player who plays a lot, and hence minimize churn. Anyhow, the primary improvement that I wish to make here is in the focus entirely. Rather than focusing completely on reducing the churn risk, how can we do this fairly? An answer, but not the only answer, is hybrid matchmaking optimization, which aims to take into account various factors in the model rather than just player churn. There are many that can be accounted for, but since I am limited in knowledge, I have chosen just 3. Those 3 being fairness optimization, i.e. trying to reduce the skill gap between matchups, dynamic difficulty adjustment, which means changing the game difficulty subtly, live to match the player's skill level, and performance, of course. And finally, retention optimization, which aims to keep players long term. To be clear, this is just different to engagement and is more focused on what players value rather than just what keeps them playing at any given point in time. Mathematically, these 3 can be represented as components of a churn edge as shown. Fairness here is just the difference in the skill levels, which I've used mu to represent, but you can choose a different variable if you want. Dynamic difficulty adjustment takes S, the recent player performance based on win-loss ratio, and subtracts it from their expected performance level. Then it adjusts the difficulty level which was used in the fairness model based on this performance prediction, with alpha being yet another scaling factor. I've tried to use different scaling constants over this video to avoid confusion, by the way. Retention optimization aims to represent the instantaneous rate at which a player might churn at time t, where lambda is a hazard function that can be affected by various factors, such as match outcome, opponent skill level, etc. Although it is just beyond my scope to model retention taking all of these into account, so I've just jumbled them all into a variable, although that could be something to look at another time. The logarithmic scale here is used to make working with the small values simpler, since it also transforms the retention value into a positive value that increases as the churn probability increases. And that is just helpful overall, since positive numbers are a lot more convenient to use in mathematics. Now finally, we can combine all of these components into one composite edge weight, where the W's that you can see are just weights for each factor. And these can be adjusted based on the context of where this is used, to place more priority on a certain factor, just like in other examples. Now the optimization becomes quite simple. We just aim to minimize the sum of these composite edge weights, as you can see. And on that note, I am finally done here. Thank you for watching, and if you have any feedback for what I've just shown, if anything's wrong, or if you have any suggestions on what I could do to improve this, feel free to let me know. But otherwise, thank you for taking your time to see this, and have a great day. Take care. Goodbye.